The world had known peace for a long time, or so it seemed. The kind of peace where borders were no longer drawn in blood, where the idea of war felt like something distant, a threat that had been long forgotten. But in the heart of a young soldier, Elena, that peace was an illusion. Elena had always known the weight of duty. She had been raised in a family where honor and service were everything, where the uniform was a symbol of strength, sacrifice, and pride. She had been trained since a young age, pushed to be the best, to defend her country with everything she had. No one had ever questioned her resolve, not until him. Luca was not a soldier like the others. He came from a different unit, one that had been sent to her camp for a temporary assignment. He was a calm, quiet man with a deep sense of conviction. His presence was soothing, and his eyes, the kind that seemed to look into the depths of her soul, made her feel something she'd never expected to feel, a connection. At first, it was small moments. Their paths crossed during drills, during briefings, or when the soldiers were allowed their few hours of free time. The way he would always offer her a quiet smile when she felt the weight of leadership bearing down on her. The way he listened when no one else did. Over time, those small moments became something else, something deeper. Elena found herself thinking about him more than she should. But duty was never far from her mind. She was a soldier. She had chosen this life. And yet, with each passing day, she felt the tension grow. Tension between the life she had been trained for and the feelings that had bloomed in her heart. Luca wasn't just a fellow soldier. He was the man who made her question everything she thought she knew. Their first real conversation came late one night, after a particularly grueling training exercise. The camp was quiet, the only sound the occasional rustle of the wind and the distant hum of equipment. Elena was sitting alone by the fire, her uniform heavy with the sweat of the day's work. She hadn't expected him to find her there, but there he was, standing a few feet away, his expression unreadable. "I thought I'd find you here," Lucas said softly, his voice steady but warm. Elena looked up, surprised but not entirely unsettled. "I needed a moment of peace," she admitted. "The weight of this, it's a lot sometimes." Lucas sat down beside her, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're a leader. The weight of command is heavy, but you bear it well." She shook her head, the weight of the responsibility threatening to overwhelm her. "Some days, I don't know if I can do it anymore. The decisions I have to make, I'm not sure I'm strong enough." Luca turned to her, his gaze unwavering. "You're stronger than you think, but you don't have to carry it alone." In that moment, Elena felt something stir deep inside her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. It was like a quiet storm, a flicker of hope that she hadn't realized she'd been missing. What if I'm not meant to do this alone?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Luca reached out, his hand brushing gently against hers. It was simple, but the touch felt like a promise. "You don't have to. You're not alone in this, Elena." They were so close now, the air thick with the tension that neither of them had dared acknowledge until this moment. Elena's heart raced, but she couldn't look away. His presence, his strength, his warmth, it all felt like something she could hold on to. But as she looked into his eyes, something else rose within her, the fear of what would come next. Elena had always been focused on her mission. She had never allowed herself the luxury of doubt. But now, with Luca's gaze steady on hers, she felt a question lingering at the edge of her mind. What would she be willing to sacrifice for love? And more importantly, what would she lose if she let herself choose love over duty? The next days were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Elena tried to keep her distance, tried to push the thoughts of Luca from her mind. But every time they crossed paths, her heart betrayed her. She wasn't just a soldier anymore. She was someone who wanted more, someone who wanted what she couldn't have. The final test came when they were called to the front lines. Their mission was clear: defend the border, protect their people, and secure the safety of their land. It was a battle that would determine the future of their country, the culmination of everything they had trained for. Elena was determined, focused, and prepared to give everything for the cause. But as they boarded the transport ships, ready to deploy, she saw Luca one last time before the chaos of battle descended. There, standing in the crowd, his eyes locked with hers, was a silent plea. It was as if he was asking her to choose between the life they could have together and the life she had always known. Elena didn't know what came over her. In that moment, everything inside her screamed for her to turn away, to focus on the mission, to follow the path that had been laid before her. But her heart, her soul, rebelled. She couldn't fight it anymore. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and in that brief moment, she kissed him. It was a kiss born of fear, longing, and hope. The kind of kiss that told them both everything they needed to know. She didn't have all the answers, but in that moment, Elena knew she couldn't walk away from him. When they parted, it was as if the world had shifted, but Elena knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened in the coming days, whatever the cost, she would face it with him by her side. The battle raged on, as brutal and unforgiving as they had feared. Elena fought with everything she had, leading her men and women through the chaos. But in the back of her mind, Luca was always there, his memory a source of strength. As the dust settled and victory was claimed, Elena realized that it wasn't just the victory that mattered. It was the decision she had made to choose love, to embrace the vulnerability that came with it. In the end, duty and love were not mutually exclusive. She had discovered that the greatest strength wasn't in the mission itself, but in the willingness to share that mission with someone who believed in her, even in the darkest moments. And with that, Elena and Luca, two soldiers torn between duty and love, had forged a bond that would endure beyond the battlefield, one that would define not just their future, but the future of the world they had fought to protect. In the aftermath of the battle, the quiet that followed was deafening. The air was thick with the remnants of war, broken equipment, smoldering wreckage, and the haunting silence of lives lost. But amidst the chaos, Elena found a clarity she hadn't known she was missing. The victory, though hard one, had given her something far more precious than any military triumph. A deep connection to Luca, the one person who had helped her realize that love was not just a weakness, but a strength that could endure even the fiercest battles. The war didn't end with their victory at the front lines. There were still remnants of the enemy to deal with, factions that hadn't been completely vanquished, and political tensions that threatened to boil over. But for Elena and Luca, the greatest challenge was no longer the battlefield. It was the uncertainty of the future they now faced together. As days turned into weeks, the quiet moments they shared became their refuge. Elena found herself sneaking away from the encampment, away from the war council, to meet Luca in the shadowed corners of their camp, where the weight of the world didn't seem so heavy. They would talk for hours, about anything and everything, from their hopes for the future to their memories of the past. These moments were their sanctuary, proof that in the midst of chaos, something pure could still grow. Yet, despite the comfort they found in each other, the reality of their roles could not be ignored. Elena was a soldier first and foremost. The mission was never far from her mind, and she could see how Luca, too, was struggling with the weight of their commitment to the cause. They both knew that their love, though powerful, was not something that could easily survive in the face of continuing war. There would always be more battles, more challenges to face, and more sacrifices to make. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the ruined landscape, Luca pulled Elena aside, his expression unusually serious. "Elena," he began, his voice steady but filled with a hint of uncertainty, "I've been thinking about everything that's happened. About you, about us. We can't ignore what we've built here. But what comes next?" Elena felt her heart skip a beat. She had known this conversation was coming, but hearing the words out loud still made her pulse quicken. "I don't know, Luca. Every part of me wants to stay by your side. I don't want to lose this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But you're right. We can't just run away from what we're part of. The world needs us, needs soldiers who can lead." Luca took her hands in his gaze intense. "And what if we can lead together? What if our bond, our connection, could be something more than just a distraction or a fleeting hope? What if it could make us stronger, help us fight not just for the mission, but for each other?" For a long moment, Elena was silent. The sounds of the camp faded into the background as she considered his words. Could they truly lead together? Could they defy the expectations of the military and create a future where love wasn't a weakness, but a force that fueled them both? I want to believe that, she whispered, finally meeting his gaze. But what if we're torn between duty and love forever? What if we're asked to choose? Luca's expression softened, and he pulled her closer, their foreheads resting together. Then we'll choose each other. Every time, even if it's hard. Because I don't want a future without you. The simplicity of his words hit her like a wave. It was a promise, a commitment that was more profound than any military oath. In that moment, Elena realized that love didn't always have to be a choice between two opposing forces. It could be the force that bound them together, made them stronger, and helped them push through even the darkest times. And so, they continued on together, two soldiers, side by side, their hearts united in a mission that was more than just about war. It was about something deeper, something that transcended the battlefield. Their love became their greatest weapon, not because it made them invincible, but because it made them human. It reminded them that even in the most brutal of wars, there was always something worth fighting for. The world outside was still torn by conflict, but Elena and Luca had found a quiet place within each other where peace was possible. It wasn't perfect, and there were still many battles ahead. But for the first time, Elena felt ready to face them, not as a soldier alone, but as someone who had found her equal in every sense. Together, they would shape the future. Together, they would face whatever came their way. Because no matter what, Elena knew one thing. Love, true and unwavering, was the most powerful force of all. And no matter how torn they were between duty and love, they would always choose each other. As the weeks passed, the war raged on with the same intensity it always had, but there was something different now. Something powerful that kept Elena and Luca grounded. Their bond, though forged in the crucible of battle, became an anchor in a storm that refused to subside. They continued their missions, fighting side by side, their synchrony in combat flawless. It was clear to everyone around them that something special existed between them, something unspoken, but undeniable. Their loyalty to each other didn't just stem from their love. It was woven into their shared experiences, the hardships they'd overcome together, and the trust they had built. But with every passing day, the reality of their situation began to feel more oppressive. The war wasn't just about survival anymore. It had become a war of attrition, a never-ending cycle of bloodshed and loss. Elena found herself leading her men into increasingly perilous situations, each more dangerous than the last. The toll on her was visible. She wasn't just fighting for victory, she was fighting to preserve the humanity she had left. One fateful night, after a particularly brutal battle, Elena and Luca sat together beneath the stars, their backs against the cold ground of their makeshift camp. The sounds of distant gunfire and the crackling of a campfire were the only noises that filled the air. "Do you ever wonder how much longer we can keep doing this?" Elena asked quietly, her voice carrying a note of weariness that had become all too familiar. "How much longer we can fight before we lose everything?" Luca turned to her, his eyes filled with the same quiet intensity he had always carried. "Every day," he admitted. "But every day, I remember why we fight. We fight for something greater than ourselves." "I know," she said softly, "but sometimes I wonder if we've already lost. So many lives have been lost. So much blood has been shed." Luca's hand reached out, gently cupping her face. "We haven't lost. Not yet. Because as long as we're here, as long as we still have each other, there's hope." Elena closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, feeling the warmth of his hand against her skin. She knew he was right, but the weight of it all was crushing her. She had chosen this path, chosen duty over everything else, but she had never anticipated the depth of the sacrifice. She had never imagined that love would complicate things so much, making her wonder if there was another way, another life that didn't involve constant conflict. The next day, the war took a turn they hadn't anticipated. They were called to a new front, one that promised to be their toughest mission yet. Intelligence reports had indicated that a new enemy faction had gained a significant advantage and was planning a decisive strike against their capital. If they didn't act quickly, the outcome of the war could be sealed. Elena and Luca stood at the head of their squad, preparing for what could be their most dangerous mission to date. They exchanged a brief glance, both understanding what this meant. This was the point of no return. If they succeeded, the war might end. If they failed, their people would be doomed. "Remember," Elena said, her voice firm but filled with the same conviction that had always driven her. "This isn't just about the mission. It's about all of us. It's about our future." Luca nodded, squeezing her hand once, silently reminding her that they were in this together. The mission unfolded in a blur of chaos. Gunfire echoed through the ruins of what had once been a peaceful city, now reduced to rubble. The enemy forces were relentless, but Elena's squad pushed forward with everything they had. Elena and Luca worked in perfect harmony, as if their movements were an extension of one another. Each fight was a test of strength, will, and courage, but the closer they got to their objective, the more they realized how high the stakes were. They reached the heart of the enemy's command center, but it was a trap. The realization hit them like a wave. This was no ordinary assault. The enemy had been waiting for them, anticipating every move. The battle turned into a deadly dance, with every soldier fighting for survival, and the stakes growing higher with each passing moment. In the middle of the chaos, Elena found herself separated from Luca. Her heart raced, her instinct screaming at her to find him, but the battlefield was a maze of gunfire and smoke. Her mind couldn't focus on anything else. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she found him, wounded, but alive. He had been cornered by enemy soldiers, his back to a wall, his gun empty, the weight of the battle bearing down on him. "Luca!" Elena shouted, rushing to his side. He turned to her, a faint smile on his lips despite the bloodied wound on his shoulder. "I knew you'd come for me. I'll always come for you," she said, her voice filled with determination. She pulled him up, supporting his weight as they fought their way through the enemies surrounding them. The two of them, alone but together, fought with everything they had. Elena had never felt so alive, so determined. Finally, they made it to the heart of the enemy command center, and with one final coordinated strike, they took down the opposing forces. The war was won. Their people were safe. As the smoke cleared, the aftermath of the battle sank in. Elena stood beside Luca, her heart pounding in her chest. She had fought for the mission, for her people, but in that moment, she realized that the true victory was not in the mission itself. It was in the life she had found with Luca. Standing together, bruised but alive, they shared a quiet moment. The war had taken so much from them, but it had also given them something precious, a future they could share. They had made it through the worst of it, together. "We did it," Elena said, her voice soft, as she gazed at Luca. "We did," he agreed, his hand finding hers once more. "But this isn't the end, Elena. It's just the beginning." And in that moment, with the world around them slowly healing from the devastation, Elena knew he was right. They had survived the war, but now, together, they would face whatever the future held. No longer torn between duty and love, but with a shared purpose that would guide them through the rest of their journey. Their love had survived the ultimate test, and with it, they would build a new life, side by side. The war had ended, but the journey ahead for Elena and Luca was far from over. The world they had fought for was healing, yet the scars of battle still lingered in the minds of the people. Rebuilding would take time, trust would need to be earned again, and peace would need to be forged, piece by piece. But as the dust settled, Elena and Luca found themselves in a new kind of fight, a fight to reclaim their lives, to find normalcy in a world that had been ravaged by war. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Elena and Luca were hailed as heroes, symbols of resilience and sacrifice. Their names were whispered in gratitude across the lands, their story a testament to the unbreakable bond between love and duty. But the attention, while flattering, felt overwhelming. Both of them longed for the simplicity of the days before the war, when their only responsibility had been each other and the mission at hand. It wasn't easy. The weight of their roles in the aftermath of the conflict was heavy. Elena found herself often sitting in quiet moments, contemplating what the future should look like. She had fought for peace, but now she had to learn how to live in it. How could she step away from the soldier she had been for so long? How could she leave behind the person who had been forged in the fires of battle, the person who had learned to thrive in chaos? Luca, too, was struggling. Though he had always been a soldier through and through, he had seen the horrors of war, the depths of human suffering. He knew that it had changed him, that it had shaped him in ways he was still trying to understand. And yet, despite the changes, he still found solace in the love he shared with Elena. She was the one constant, the one thing that had remained unbroken. One evening, as the two of them sat together on the balcony of their new home, a small, peaceful cottage that overlooked the hills and valleys they had once fought to protect, Luca turned to Elena, his eyes thoughtful. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" he asked, his voice soft, but laced with a quiet intensity. Elena didn't answer right away. She had been thinking about that very question every day. What had come next? What was their place in a world that was no longer at war? "I think about it every day," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "The future feels so uncertain now. We've fought for so long that I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do when there's no battle left to fight. It's like I've lost my purpose." Luca took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Maybe our purpose isn't something we have to find out there," he said, his gaze steady on her. "Maybe it's here with us. We've survived the war, Elena. We've earned a life together. Maybe that's all we need, to build a future with each other." Elena turned to him, her heart swelling with emotion. She had known, deep down, that this was true. She had spent so many years focusing on the fight, on the mission, that she had forgotten to allow herself to simply live. And now, with Luca by her side, she could finally see it. They could create a life together, one that didn't require battle or bloodshed, but rather one built on love, trust, and shared dreams. "I want that," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I want to build a life with you, Luca. A life where we're not just surviving, but thriving together." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Elena and Luca stood together, watching the world shift from day to night. The world had been forever changed by the war, but there was a beauty in the quiet that followed. The world was healing, and so were they. It wasn't going to be easy. There would still be challenges ahead, both in the world around them and in their own hearts. But for the first time in a long time, Elena felt a sense of peace. They had fought for their future, and now they could live it, side by side. And as they stood there, with the weight of the past behind them and the promise of the future ahead, Elena realized that the love they shared was the strongest thing they had ever fought for. It had been tested in the heat of battle, and it had survived. And now, it would be the force that guided them through the rest of their lives, no matter what obstacles they faced. Together, they were ready for whatever came next. Because love, they had learned, was the ultimate victory. And no matter how torn they had once been between duty and love, they had found a way to embrace both, to let both coexist in harmony. They had written their own story, a story of resilience, of love, and of the strength to face whatever came their way. Their journey was just beginning. As the months passed, Elena and Luca found themselves in a rhythm they hadn't known was possible. Their days were no longer consumed by the chaos of battle, but by small joys they had long since forgotten. The sound of birdsong in the morning, the laughter of children running through the fields, the peace that came with simply being together. They traveled, when they could, to other parts of the world they had once fought to protect. The scars of war were still visible, but so was the resilience of the people who lived there. Elena and Luca were welcomed everywhere, as heroes, but also as people who understood that the true victory was not in the battlefield. It was in the rebuilding, the healing, and the love that people shared once the fighting stopped. One evening, as they sat by the fire, watching the stars twinkle above them, Elena turned to Luca, her expression soft. "I never thought we'd get here," she said, her voice filled with quiet wonder. Luca smiled, his hand brushing against hers. "I didn't either. But somehow, here we are." A silence fell between them, but it was a comfortable one. They had learned to be at peace with each other, and with themselves. No longer soldiers bound by duty, they were simply two people who had found love amid the ashes of war. But life, it seemed, was never going to let them go entirely. Just as they began to embrace the quiet life they had always dreamed of, a messenger arrived. The letters were sealed with the emblem of the new council, an organization formed in the wake of the war to maintain peace and unity among the planets. It was an invitation for Elena and Luca to become part of something larger than themselves. The council had been formed to ensure that what they had fought for, the peace, the future, was maintained across the galaxy. Elena opened the letter, her eyes scanning the words. When she finished, she let out a long breath. "It's not over, is it?" she said quietly. Luca looked at her, understanding immediately. "No, but maybe this is our new mission, our new purpose. Maybe now, we get to help others find the peace we fought for. We get to build something lasting." For the first time, Elena felt a sense of clarity. The fight wasn't over, but perhaps it never had been. She and Luca had fought for peace, for love, and for a future worth living. But the real victory wasn't in ending the war. It was in ensuring that the lessons of the past weren't forgotten, that future generations could live without the same burdens they had carried. The two of them stood, side by side, looking out at the horizon. The sun was setting once again, casting a golden glow across the landscape. It was a moment of perfect stillness, a moment of understanding. Elena turned to Luca, her voice firm with conviction. "We fought for this," she said. "We fought for the future, for the chance to give others the life we found." Luca nodded. "And we'll continue to fight, for as long as it takes." They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that the world was still fragile and the challenges far from over. But now, they understood the true nature of their purpose. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were leaders, mentors, protectors. They had seen what war could do to a soul, but they had also seen what love, hope, and determination could rebuild. And as they walked hand in hand into the future, Elena and Luca realized that their greatest victory wasn't in the battles they had won. It was in the lives they would change, the peace they would help bring about, and the legacy they would leave behind. Their journey together was far from over. But whatever came their way, they knew they would face it side by side, bound not just by love, but by an unshakable belief in the power of peace. And that belief, they knew, would be their greatest weapon of all.